Hello there. From what I've been reading, Belgium must be a hotbed of antisemitism, especially when an Imam is allowed to recite anti-Jewish passages from the Koran inside the Belgian parliament. But it gets worse, much worse. The Jewish community of Brussels will be horrified at the news that a Pakistani Imam, Qari Muhammad Ansar Noorani, was permitted to recite a verse from the Koran in the Belgian Parliament building that calls on Muslims to kill Jews and take Jews as captives, just as was done on October the 7th last year. But not only that, two of the worthies of Brussels, the Belgian Parliament's Deputy Speaker and Vice President Hassan Koyuncu and the State Secretary of Brussels Metropolitan Area, Nawal Ben Hamou, presented that Speaker with a medal, reportedly the Brussels Community Award, for his successful integration. Now that's a real what the f*** moment, isn't it? Sounds more to me like Belgium has successfully integrated with a certain demographic. No wonder woke lefty lovies love the EU and Brussels so much. The Israeli ambassador to Belgium, Edith Rosenweig, understandably said on X, "Absolutely horrified to discover that in Brussels Parliament an invited Muslim preacher chose to recite parts of Surah Al-Ahzab, a surah about a battle between Muslims and Jews. This is a surah that explicitly calls for the killing and taking captive of Jews in these words. He could have chosen anything else. A frightening symbolic message to anyone who knows the Koran, straight from the Parliament podium. In Brussels Parliament, a city with 18,000 Jews who are already experiencing increased anti-Semitism and fear." Now, according to the Israeli Diaspora Affairs Minister, Amichai Chili, Belgium is one of the most anti-Israel countries in Europe. He told the Jerusalem Post on Saturday that Belgium, along with France, lead the most pro-Hamas and anti-Israel line in all of Europe, and it's no wonder that with them radical Islam is rampant. Turning their back on Israel has been clarified as a difficult strategic mistake. And the Belgian Justice Minister Paul van Tigchelt admitted last week that Hamas was active in his country, engaged in lobbying and fundraising. But it has sparked a lot of concern among some Belgian politicians, some of whom want an inquiry into how this happened and who was involved, and to also strip Noorani of his award, and also from others if they also broke their parliament's rules on neutrality. But the very fact this can take place in Europe, I think, shows the direction of travel of the whole continent. More and more, our politics is being affected by the presence of a certain demographic, and their influence grows by the year, if not by the month. I wonder how the 18,000 Jews in Brussels felt after listening to that. I expect many of them were distraught and are looking to flee Europe. But to go where? Maybe to the only state on earth where Jews will not expect to face the increasing waves of anti-Semitism. Now I wonder which state that would be. One that's recently been attacked and forced to defend itself, maybe? Jews and Christians alike now face being ostracised and persecuted globally, with Christians now officially the most persecuted group on earth. Yes. Although another certain demographic is always very quick to play the victim card at every opportunity, isn't it? Usually after someone else has had to defend themselves against that demographic. If you're a Christian, even in certain parts of the UK, you can't sing outside churches and you can't preach the gospel on the streets. You face being arrested by the now one-sided and overly zealous police, possibly because of a false claim made by a non-Christian about what you said. And if you're Jewish, you live in constant fear of physical harm. Have we got to the point where we are too civilized to do what is required to defend ourselves? So frozen by our own need to be civilized that we never act logically and objectively to the potential threat, where those that would do us harm can manipulate our need to be seen to be civilized against us? Or is it worse? Are certain people and foreign entities mobilizing what I can only describe as a hideous darkness against us, while their activists work amongst us to spread hate, division and fear, even in the higher political levels? And we're too busy reacting to all their divisive inclusivity agendas to bother to see the wood for the trees. The West is in the process of falling, mostly driven by the weak fear of losing some of our civilized behaviour should we need to defend ourselves. For example, some of our civilized civil servants and judges are too frightened to reject asylum applications or deport people just in case one of their mates thinks they are bigoted and uncivilized. And some vicars are more than happy to hand out baptisms just to reinforce their own view of themselves as civilized. It doesn't matter to any of them that their so-called civilized behaviour might well end up with the murder, rape or injury of their fellow UK citizens. And our enemies and those that would take advantage do so gleefully, laughing in our faces all the way to the bank. We must be mugs to tolerate it. And now we have the Labour Party going wobbly, and you can see the direction of travel for Keir Sir Flip-Flop Starmer, can't you? Lining up to call for a ceasefire in Gaza, and he might even get his mob to back an upcoming SNP motion in the House of Commons for a ceasefire. But we could all see this happening because Labour relies so heavily on that demographic vote. It was only a matter of time before the cave-in occurred. The next will be that a Labour government will declare the existence of a Palestinian state when they get into power. But as I've said before, demographics is king. Whichever section of society grows more and faster than the others will, in the end, be the majority, with the inevitable result that in a democracy they gain democratic power over everyone else and make the laws. And were that to happen, you only have to look around the world at certain countries and their attitudes to women and animals, for example, to see that our national civilised attitudes would be at risk of being unceremoniously stripped away. In the end, it will be our civilised attitude that being civilised always wins through that will bring about the demise of our civilisation. It seems to me that too many of our politicians would rather roll over and submit rather than appear to be uncivilised and fight back to protect our cultures and values. We have an Imam citing anti-Jewish tracts from a holy book and getting awards in Brussels, while in the UK, Christians openly reciting from the Bible are harassed and even arrested. We face dark times indeed, and looking to a political answer to this mess appears now to be like going to Harold Shipman for private health care. Our entire political system seems to be a rabbit frozen by the headlights of the upcoming trucks barrelling along the M25. They haven't got the will to pass the laws that are required, or worse, they actively don't want to change anything. And they haven't got the will to get weaving on rebuilding our defences, part of which means identifying all those within this country who wish us harm and returning them quickly from whence they came. But when looking at the total mess the establishment has made of everything, from defence to borders to food security to energy security to health security and to the cultural and financial destruction of the UK, it must be obvious by now that the current situation is exactly what they all want.